Welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies with your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann. For more studies, visit our website at www.ebiblefellowship.org. And now, here's Chris McCann.
Good evening and welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Bible study in the book of Genesis. Tonight is study number 16 of Genesis chapter 34, and we will begin reading in verse 20. And Hamor and Shechem his son came unto the gate of their city, and communed with the men of their city, saying, These men are peaceable with us. Therefore let them dwell in the land, and trade therein. For the land, behold, it is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us for wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only herein will the men consent unto us for to dwell with us, to be one people. If every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised, shall not their cattle and their substance and every beast of theirs be ours? Only let us consent unto them, and they will dwell with us. And unto Hamor and unto Shechem his son hearken all that went out of the gate of his city, and every male was circumcised, all that went out of the gate of his city. And I'll stop reading there. In our last study, we were looking at the word that is translated as peaceable in verse 21. These men are peaceable with us, and we saw that this word, which is used 28 times, and only here is it translated as peaceable, is actually a word that indicates they were walking in accord with God's law, uprightly or perfect. They were doing all things well. Nothing was amiss. There was no behavior to mar their conduct. In other words, their witness up until this point, we could say, was befitting the character of those who identify with and have relationship with God. They were, the sons of Israel, were giving the appearance of faithful Christians. We could say, to modernize it so we can fully understand the way they were living close by to the men of Shechem. The people of that city thought that they are good men, upstanding people, and so that was one of the points that Shechem and his father Hamor were making to the men of the city. They are peaceable with us. And then it goes on to say in verse 21, Therefore, let them dwell in the land and trade therein. For the land, behold, it is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us for wives, and let us give them our daughters. Let them dwell in the land and trade. And in the last study, I mentioned how this word relates to sharing the gospel, because God likens the gospel to merchandise. For example, in Isaiah 55, if we go to Isaiah 55 and we read the first couple of verses, it says, Ho, everyone that thirsteth, come ye to the waters, and he that hath no money, come ye, buy and eat, yea, come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. Wherefore do ye spend money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which satisfieth not? Hearken diligently unto me, and eat ye that which is good, and let your soul delight itself in fatness. So come and buy. That's what you do when you go shopping and you go to the store. You purchase merchandise. And by using this kind of language, God is establishing himself as though he were a merchant, and his gospel of salvation, or the gospel of the truth of the Word of God, is the merchandise. And though he uses the figure of speech of coming by, yet he also says, "Come ye to the waters, and he that has no money, come ye, buy and eat." And at the last part of verse 1, buy wine and milk without money and without price. And that is according to the biblical principle, freely you have received, freely give. But nonetheless, that does not mean that God does not characterize the gospel as merchandise and himself as a merchant. And we find with this statement, let them trade therein, that's what's in view. The word trade is also found in Genesis 42, the same Hebrew word in verses 33 and 34. Genesis chapter 42, we read in verse 33, "And the man, the Lord of the country, said unto us, Hereby shall I know that you're true men. Leave one of your brethren here with me, and take food for the famine of your households, and be gone, and bring your youngest brother unto me. Then shall I know that ye are no spies, but that ye are true men. So will I deliver you your brother, and ye shall traffic in the land." And that's the same word that is translated as trade. To traffic in the land means you can purchase, you can sell items, and you will have freedom to do so. And by the way, this is Joseph who is saying this to his brethren who are yet unaware that it is Joseph. But the word is also found in 1 Kings in chapter 10, 1 Kings 10. We read in verse 28, "And Solomon had horses brought out of Egypt, and linen yarn. The king's merchants received the linen yarn at a price." Solomon had horses brought from Egypt and linen yarn, and the king's merchants received the linen yarn at a price. That is, Solomon had merchants that did the king's business. And that description would actually apply to God's elect as we would send forth the gospel, especially in the day of salvation. "Come ye, buy wine and milk without money, without price." We were carrying out the task of being the king's merchant, and only the king is the Lord Jesus Christ, eternal God. But we were his merchants. And that's the reason why it became such an issue once God brought judgment on the churches and congregations. And he had loosed Satan, and Satan had entered in and taken his seat. And it was at that point that the image to the beast was made, and all were commanded to bow down to the image. Well, we read in Revelation 13, as that is described, it says in Revelation 13, I'll start in verse 14, "And deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword, and did live, and he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. That was, of course, completely unacceptable to God and for God's merchants, the king's merchants. No, God would not allow his people to serve Satan in order to deal in the merchandise of the gospel. And so he ended the church age, commanded his people to come out, and without the churches, they could freely trade in the land or traffic in the land. And actually that would be the spiritual meaning of what Joseph was telling his brethren, because remember, that was during the 7-year famine, and that 7-year famine is called Great Tribulation in Acts chapter 7. And so Joseph had yet to make himself known, and his brethren were still in the land of Canaan, or they were still in the churches, but later he would lead them out and draw them to Egypt and reveal himself to them over the second part of the 7-year famine, the last 5 years, which represented the latter rain period. And there they could trade or traffic in the land. So that's what God did. He commanded his elect servants to come out of the corporate church, leaving all with the mark of the beast, and that signaled that they were under the power and authority of Satan, and that meant that they were unsaved. Well, it was only acceptable at that point within the churches and congregations of the world for the unsaved carrying the mark of the beast to buy and sell. Only they could be the pastors and the elders and the deacons and the preachers and the teachers and the evangelists, and they were the only qualified ones for that evil task, not God's people. Well, anyway, if we go back to the Old Testament, we'll just look at one last verse that has this word, the Hebrew word. It's Strong's number 5503, and that's in Proverbs chapter 31. Proverbs 31, and I'll start reading in verse 10. It says, "Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeketh wool and flax, and worketh willingly with her hands. She is like the merchant's ships. She bringeth her food from afar." And it's the word merchants. Merchants is the same word. Well, let's go back to Genesis 34. And again, in verse 21, these men are peaceable with us. Therefore, let them dwell in the land and traffic therein. Let them carry out their business. And that spiritually point to the business of the gospel. And then in verse 22, it goes on to say, "Only herein will the men consent unto us for to dwell with us to be one people. If every male among us be circumcised, as they are circumcised, shall not their cattle and their substance and every beast of theirs be ours? Only let us consent unto them, and they will dwell with us." And what they're referring to is what the sons of Jacob said to Shechem and Hamor back in verse 13, when he and his father came asking for the hand of Dinah in marriage. Then they answered, and the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father deceitfully, and said, because he had defiled Dinah their sister, And they said unto them, We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one that is uncircumcised, for that were a reproach unto us. But in this will we consent unto you, if you will be as we be, that every male of you be circumcised. Then will we give our daughters unto you, and we will take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. So when the son and the father, Shechem and Hamor, tell the men of their village that only herein will the men consent unto us for to dwell with us to be one people, well, they're not making that up. They're not, exaggerating what their conversation with the sons of Jacob had to do with. No, they're actually saying the same words, the same word consent. We have to consent. And also one people. If we consent, we will be one people. And that's why this is, historically, it's a terrible thing what the children of Israel did to the men of Shechem, the whole village, the whole town. But spiritually, it's perhaps even worse, because it is teaching us of those who bring a gospel, and they claim it's the true gospel, but as they proclaim these things and teach these things, they are being deceitful. They are lying to those who they are witnessing to. And the lie is that we are the people of God, and if you do this thing, if you're baptized, if you accept Christ, if you walk down the aisle, if you say the sinner's prayer, and maybe 100 other things they might add, if you do this and if you do that, if you consent and you agree with these things, then we will be one people. And they have the name of Christ. They have the name of Christian, just like the sons of Israel had the name of Israel, or the sons of Jacob. It's not for a little while longer, not too much longer, that God will change Jacob's name to Israel. But nonetheless, that's who they're representing here. They are the children of Israel. They are representing the kingdom of God. They are the outward representation of God's kingdom on the earth. And the people of Shechem are the people of the world who hear the gospel of the Bible and believe it. And we would have to say that the historical context is indicating that these men heard the gospel, these people of Shechem, and believed it because they are willing and they will give their consent. They do what they're asked to do. They take upon themselves the sign of the covenant, which is circumcision. And they are fine with the whole idea of being one people with the Israelites, with the sons of Jacob. Now, when we think of one people, well, there's many scriptures we could go to, but let's go to Romans chapter 9. Romans 9, starting in verse 23, it says, and that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy, which he had afore prepared unto glory, even us, whom he hath called, not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles. As he saith also in Hosea, I will call them my people, which were not my people, and her beloved, which was not beloved. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, Ye are not my people, there shall they be called the children of the living God. You see, the gospel called many, and they came in to the churches and took upon themselves the name of Christian, the family of God. They had the name of God's people, children of a living God. And that is the like scenario that is happening in Genesis 34. Or we could also go to 2 Corinthians chapter 6. 2 Corinthians 6 verse 16 says, "And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people." My people. And this is why we know that it is God's elect who are in view in Revelation chapter 18, which is a chapter describing the fall of Babylon, or the fall of this world, and Judgment Day, our present time. And then God proclaims in Revelation 18, beginning in verse 4, "And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues." My people, come out. And that would identify with 2 Corinthians 6, "Be ye separate." We are to leave the things of the world because we are God's people. That's how God looks upon his elect. And now, we're living in different circumstances than were at hand during the church age or in the time of Israel, where wheat and tares grew together, and God called many but chose few. Now the Lord is just dealing with those that are truly his elect. They have become saved. And that's really what the gospel always pointed to. But due to the erroneous nature of the call that many churches made, and the lies that were involved, the deceitfulness, do this good work, accept Christ, or do this work of faith, and you will be a child of God. You will be a child of the living God. You will be his people. And yet the truth was, well, that would be fine to go into the church and fine to take the sign of the covenant if you believed, but you also should have been taught, and the church has had the obligation to teach, that these things are only signs. If you get baptized, or the Old Testament preacher or prophet would have rightly said, it's only a sign if you're circumcised. It cannot save you. It does not guarantee your entrance into the kingdom of heaven, but it's only a sign. There's a deeper spiritual meaning. That's what should have been done, but that's in most cases what was not done. And so people eagerly entered into the family of God, and thinking, now we are one people, we are God's people, all of us together. All of us are Jews. All of us are Christians. And yet this was the deceitful nature of what the people of Shechem were told, as they followed it to the letter. They followed the gospel of the children of Israel to the letter. They did it precisely as they were told to do it, and it led to their death. And that's a big takeaway that God would have us to understand from this chapter, that false gospels kill. They kill their hearers.
Thank you for joining us for eBible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies with your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann. For more studies and information, visit our website at www.ebiblefellowship.org. Until our next Bible study, may the Lord's perfect will be done.